where we went was Muscle Shoals Sound, and the first time we were there was they had just opened for a few months before that. They had the guys, the Swampers, that everybody knew of at that time. So we ended up going down there, and so we just assumed we were just going to kind of show up and just kind of watch. The guys that sing would sing, and do parts and stuff like that. So we get there, Jimmy Johnson, the engineer, who was the guitar player for them for a lot of time. And so I just kind of spoke up and said, okay, where's the guitar player? And Jimmy just kind of looked at me and said, well, you're the guitar player. I went,
oh, my goodness.
Wait a minute, what are you talking about?
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of the Studio 101 Recording Podcast. My name is Brad Phillips, and today we have a special guest, Mr. Buddy Strong. Buddy, thank you for coming in and hanging out with us today on the podcast. Yeah. It's kind of a nasty morning. We had a little bit of snow and ice in the area.
We did.
But thank you for coming out anyway. For those of you who are not familiar with Buddy is a living legend in in
his own mind,
in the Southeast here, and we are incredibly blessed to have him within 30-40 minute driving distance from the studio here. And Buddy has had a long storied career in audio and studio and live audio, kind of a combination over your career, I would say. Buddy, kind of fill everybody in on, maybe where you're born, where you grew up, and how you got into the audio world.
Yeah. Well, I was born in Easley, and went to school at Easley High. Graduated from there, and I had started playing in a band during that time.
What era? What year era was this?
That was I was born in 1951, so that band was started in about 1966.
Okay, gotcha.
And we played together. I played with a couple of other little bands in that era, but then when we kind of thought that's what we wanted to do, kind of got serious. We were about 17, I guess, and we had this R&B band. And we had a little agent that was booking us at some of the college fraternities down in Alabama and between Georgia and that kind of stuff. And so we were playing it one night at this fraternity party, and this guy came up and just kind of started talking to us, said, hey, man, I really like the band, that kind of stuff. And we're all kind of rolling our eyes because, you hear that all the time, So anyway, so he just kept saying he was looking for a band. He had some contacts, and he wanted to know if we'd ever recorded anything. And we went, well, no, we'd never done anything. Well, would you like to? Well, yeah,
Sure.
It seemed like a silly question to us at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So we just kind of developed a relationship with him over a few months, probably 6 months, and we finally decided to hire him as our manager.
Okay.
And so he was giving us little information on how to do this and that different stuff like a manager would do. And we were young, we didn't know, we were just out there having fun. That was basically it.
Yeah.
And so he said, well, now I've got us a session in Muscle Shoals, and we went like,
where? You're like, what?
Where is that?
Yeah.
So then he started telling us about it, where it was in Alabama and stuff like that, and people had recorded there. Now, we had were into the R&B stuff, and so we kind of knew Wilson Pickett and all those people like that, and we knew they recorded, started looking that up and found out that's where they recorded, like at Fame there,
Yeah, right.
And, okay, hey, that sounds like fun.
Yeah.
So they book a date for us, and we go down and we do a couple of songs, 2 or 3 songs, I guess. I don't remember exactly what that was, but so we thought, hey, this is great. This is wonderful. And I kind of got the bug at that point. I said, well, this would be fun to do.
Yeah.
So we come back, and a few weeks later, he calls us. He said, well, we really like the songs that you guys did, but we feel like we might need to hire some professional players to play,
kind of recut everything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we went like, well, of course,
Right.
we're just a bunch of kids. So he books the studio, and so where we went was Muscle Shoals Sound.
Okay.
And the first time we were there was they had just opened for a few months before that. They had the guys, the Swampers that everybody knew of at that time, had been at Fame.
Right.
And so they wanted to be a part of that. And Rick Hall apparently decided that he didn't want to give up any of that. And so they just said, okay, we'll just open our own place, because they were the ones playing on all those hits.
They were kind of driving that whole
studio
thing
exactly.
there. Yeah.
And so we ended up going down there, and so we just assumed we were just going to kind of show up and just kind of watch, The guys that sing would sing, and do parts and stuff like that. So we get there, and so Jimmy Johnson, the engineer, who was the guitar player for them for a lot of time.
We're talking about the Swampers.
The Swampers,
Yep.
And so he says, well, let me introduce you to everybody. This is Barry Beckett. He's the keyboard player. David Hood, the drummer, and Roger Hawkins. No, David Hood was the bass player.
Yeah.
Roger Hawkins was the drummer.
Right.
And so I just kind of spoke up and said, well, okay, well, where's the guitar player? And Jimmy just kind of looked at me and said, well, you're the guitar player. And I went,
oh, my goodness.
Wait a minute. What are you talking about? He said, man, on that last stuff, I loved the tone of your guitar.
Yeah.
It was perfect.
Right.
So we're not going to change that.
Oh, God. Side note, what was your setup at that time? Guitar
I was playing a Gibson 335, and I think it was a Fender Pro Reverb.
Wow. Okay.
Classic for that.
Just guitar and a cable into the amp.
Into the amp.
Yeah.
That's it. Nothing else.
Gotcha.
So, okay, I kind of had to, get a little courage there, to do it. And I think it was Beckett said, well, let's go into the studio, bring the singer in, you get your guitar, and let's let him sing the song, and you play it, along with that. Okay, well, that seems pretty easy. We could do that. So we start playing, and I look over at I'm here like this. He's over to my left there at a piano, and he's writing a chart. And I didn't understand what he was doing.
Yeah.
I'd never seen that before. It was a number chart.
Okay.
And so they just kind of, he wrote this. Well, everybody was doing that, but he was right there next to me, and I could kind of see what he was doing. And he said, we got through it. And he said, all right, let's try it one time.
You were like, what?
Oh, well, what, really?
Yeah.
Because, playing, being that age, it take us weeks to learn a song, And so so we played through it, and it was really good, Yeah. I was a little surprised. And he said, okay. So they stopped, and so then they each started kind of throwing some ideas in. At this point, let's do this kind of a punch here, or, that kind of just kind of doing a little bit of arrangement of the thing.
Yeah.
Okay. So we did that. We cut that, and I think we cut it one more time.
2 takes.
2 takes.
So 2 takes.
Yeah. And it was marvelous to me,
For sure.
Yeah, and so we did. We ended up doing 3 tracks with them. We had 2 singers, and one of the guys was more of an R&B singer, and one of the guys was more of a kind of a pop singer.
Yeah.
The R&B guy's name was Mark Penland, and the other singer was Barry Kirk, and they already had cut a track with another. Charlie had cut a track with another band, but they didn't like the singer, so they decided to use Barry for him to sing that one.
Okay.
So we got all that part done, and then the next day we came back in, and the Muscle Shoals horn section came in.
No way.
And I'm going like, wow.
Yeah. You guys are living the dream.
Oh, I'm telling you.
17, 18.
We were here, and then Sunday what are we doing way up here? How's that working?
That's wild.
So anyway, so we finished the whole thing. He got it mixed, and I'm thinking about 2 weeks later, he called and said, "Well, I got us a record deal."
No way.
He said, "In fact, I got us 2 record deals." What? So one of them was with ABC Probe, and that was the Marcus Penland. That was the 2 songs that he did. He had more of an R&B voice.
Yeah.
And then they had Barry signed to Lowry Records, and out of Atlanta.
Okay.
And they put the records out, and we got some airplay around, and we did some radio promotion, and that kind of stuff. But it was really that second session that we went to was when I went like, this is what I want to do.
Wow.
Right here.
Yeah.
This is, because I'd sit in the control room with Jimmy while he was doing his stuff, and it was just like mesmerizing to me because I'd never really seen anything like that. Had never even seen it on TV.
Well, I want to interject a couple things here.
Okay.
Because I'm curious if you remember the setup. So it was a smallish control room, if I remember correctly. It was not a very large control room.
It was a small house.
Yeah.
It was an old house.
Yeah.
And the center of the house was, they gutted it, basically taking all the walls out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then they had a little bit of a cage built around the drums at that time, only maybe this high,
Yeah,
like
kind of like gobo walls
kind
or
of like
something.
that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the piano was sitting out in the room, and I was sitting out in the room. I think they had a little gobo up next to me, protecting the piano kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Technically, I really don't remember. I really don't know because I had no clue at that point what microphones they were using.
Gotcha. So the control
like
was it one of the UA consoles with the big knobs? Do you remember which console was in there?
I believe that's what it was. Yeah.
That's awesome. And 2-inch tape.
2-inch tape, but I think it was 16 track.
Okay, gotcha. How about monitor? I've always been curious about this monitoring. Was there any type of monitoring going on, or like?
Yeah,
what?
But I don't remember. I think we used headphones.
Might have used a headphone setup.
Yeah, and I don't remember what kind of monitors were in the control room. I just didn't.
Right, but you got but being in that scenario, I mean, I can only imagine, being at that age, and then kind of thrust into the premier sort of recording, platform area of the time.
It's like
the late
meeting God.
60s.
I mean, basically, like these guys that we heard their music, all these, for the last 3 or 4 years, and
right.
And we knew who they were. We didn't know that was where they were recorded, but we knew that's who it was, and it was just mind blowing. I mean, for the rest of us, for us guys. I mean, it was in '69, I believe.
Do you still have copies? Do you still have copies of those singles?
I do.
Awesome.
In fact, I have some in the car. I meant to bring them in.
No way.
I do.
That's fantastic. 45s?
45s, yeah.
Right. That's incredible, man. When you told me a little bit about this story, I don't know, several months ago.
Yeah.
That I didn't know about you. I had no idea. And as a matter of fact, what made me laugh was Buddy was like, I just remembered this. I'm going to tell you about this right now.
Okay.
And I was like, Buddy, this is the craziest story I've heard, and I had no idea that you guys had done that at that era of time. And I can only imagine what it must have been like to go from Easley, South Carolina, to but I mean, you're showing up in Muscle Shoals. It's not much different than Easley.
It's about the size of Easley.
Yeah, but
in fact, they're a little bit smaller.
Right. So it wasn't like you guys were going to L.A. or New York or whatever to record a big record.
One motel was a Holiday Inn, I believe.
Yeah.
And it was. And the next time I went to Muscle Shoals with Garfield Ruff, we stayed at the same hotel.
Oh my gosh!
Because that was about it was almost 10 years difference.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the kind of progression of your career. And well, obviously you kind of started out your career as a live player, guitar player, morphed into couple of different bands there in the late 60s, early 70s.
Yeah.
And
some club gigs, house gigs, some of that stuff,
Right. That was kind of the thing that you did in that era of the music industry.
Yeah.
As a guitar player, bounce around a little bit, and you already mentioned it, but Garfield Ruff was you guys were not well known enough, to me, because it was a cool vibe, kind of to me, like in our little pocket of the world here, Marshall Tucker set the tone, right?
Right.
Toy Caldwell, the Caldwell boys, and Doug and all those guys sort of set the tone for our little area of the world here,
Yep.
Paved the way, I guess is another way to put it.
Right.
And opened up the doors.
Opened up a lot of doors.
Yeah, opened up the doors for, for management and studios and labels to come take a peek at what was happening here in kind of the Spartanburg, Greenville area. And, Garfield Ruff was, during that era, you guys kind of came along during that era of the heyday of Marshall Tucker.
Yeah.
What was did you guys feel like, since Marshall Tucker was so popular, like maybe you guys coming along, you had a door that might open because, you had a relationship with those guys or
a little
openers
bit, yeah.
or all that stuff?
Frank Wilkie was the bass player with the Toy Factory.
Yep, which was a spinoff of, it was Toy Caldwell's spinoff band.
Yeah. Early. That was their one of the early bands.
Let me correct what I said. Toy Factory was pre Marshall Tucker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it kind of at the end of Toy Factory was the Vietnam War.
Mm-hmm.
And Toy and Tommy and Doug all ended up joining the Marines and going to Nam.
Right.
And Frank didn't want to go to Nam, I think is what it was, and he joined the Air Force.
Right.
So they got back a couple of years before he got out.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's when they formed Marshall Tucker.
Right.
And then a little later was when Frank met Ronnie Godfrey and Alan Pearson, and they were playing with Moses Dillard.
Okay. Gotcha.
It was interesting.
See, I didn't know all this progression of all this stuff, so I'm learning something.
Going back to the first thing we did, one of the songs that we recorded was a song that he had recorded before, and it was called My Elusive Dreams. And we really liked the song, and we ended up recording it, and that's kind of a thing that went, the combinations of everybody, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Some of the guys that sort of interchanged in the bands between Tucker Band and Garfield and all the stuff.
Right.
What era? You'll have to help me remember. The Garfield Ruff era was what years?
74 through the last thing we did was in 84.
And how many records or singles did Garfield have available?
We did a record for Capitol Records.
Mm-hmm.
We did a movie soundtrack for Capitol Records. We did another record for Christopher Records. And we did a bunch of other recording too.
Yeah.
What
studios were those records made at?
The first thing, we're talking about going back to Muscle Shoals. Well, we went back to Muscle Shoals and recorded some stuff there, and the record company wanted it to be, they just kind of assigned us a producer,
Yeah.
In fact, we had like Al Cooper and Buddy Bowie.
Oh my goodness!
All those guys come see the band, and were really interested, but we couldn't work out a schedule with them.
Wow!
So we ended up going to Muscle Shoals, and we were with Terry Woodford and Clayton Ivey.
Mm-hmm.
And so we cut some stuff there, and the record company didn't feel like it was. We were getting into that age of like My Sharona and that kind of stuff.
Okay.
So they wanted everything to have a little bit more edge to it.
Okay.
So we ended up going to Sun Treader in Vermont.
Really?
And this guy Craig Leon, who had produced Blondie and the Ramones and a bunch of those guys, like that,
right,
ended up producing the record that actually got released.
No way. See, I did not know that part of that either. That's crazy.
And then in the interim there, between the time we cut the first stuff at Muscle Shoals and we did that record, our lawyer got us a deal to do the soundtrack for a movie.
Mm-hmm.
That's an interesting story.
Right.
So he called us one day and said, "Hey, would you guys be interested in doing a soundtrack for a movie?" And like, we're going to say no, Well, sure.
Yeah.
So this was in 1978, I believe. It was right after we signed with Capitol.
Mm-hmm.
And so we said, "Yeah, well, how are we? What do we need to do?" We'd never done anything like that before.
Yeah.
He said, "Well, what we're going to do is we're going to send you a video of the movie, but it's going to be a little while because at that time they were just starting to dump stuff to beta and stuff like that."
Yeah.
And he said it's $10,000 for the transfer.
Oh my gosh!
So we're probably going to wait a few months here, but we will send you a thing. So they sent it to us, and he said, "We need something pretty quick." Okay, so they sent us this tape, and it was right about the time when you could go to these movie stores and rent these beta machines, these little larger beta machines.
Okay.
So I went down to my neighborhood place, and we rented one. We brought the movie back to my house. We watched it twice. We talked about it for about 30 minutes or so, and each guy in the band kind of picked out a character they wanted, or what they wanted to do.
Yeah.
And we all wrote a song that night. The next day,
Individually, y'all individually wrote one.
Individually wrote 5 songs.
Okay.
The next morning, God, I wish I remember the name of the club we were playing at. It was over off Augusta Road, down towards Greenwood, I think. But anyway, so we went over there. We had been playing there for a couple of days, and we went over there, and we learned those 5 songs and recorded them.
Where? Where did y'all record them?
We recorded them at the club.
At the club?
Right off the console.
No way.
5 songs.
Uh-huh.
Sent them to the guy, and they flipped out. And we were going like, "What?"
This can't be real, right?
And he says, "Can we use this tape?" We said,
No,
you can't use that tape."
They wanted to use the tape in the film.
We said, "Yeah, they wanted to use that." And we went, "No."
Yeah.
No. So he said, "Okay." So they set up a thing back through Capitol, back down there with Terry Woodford and Clayton Ivey.
Back at Muscle Shoals.
Back at Muscle Shoals. Yeah. And we went back down there. And so we cut those 5 tracks, had the Muscle Shoals horn section, and have you ever heard any of that stuff?
Not this soundtrack stuff. No.
Okay, I'll send you a copy of that.
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting. And then so we did that, and some other players came in, sax guy and some other stuff, background singers, I think.
Yeah.
And so it got released as a compilation for the movie and had all these other people on it, Mm-hmm. I don't even remember who they were now. But I'll send you a copy of the thing. And it did pretty well, and it was released all over the world.
Wow. That's crazy. So five songs you wrote off of a beta VHS.
In one day.
Yeah, in one day.
And, yeah.
That is wild.
The movie won the Miami Film Festival or something like that.
Okay. That is too cool, man. That is just, that's really cool. I didn't know that whole story. That's pretty amazing that y'all made it happen like that. So move, like after the Garfield Rough thing kind of fizzled out, or what was your next what was your next move
Well,
kind of after that?
Sure. I was mainly hanging in town, doing sessions with at Sandcastle
Okay.
Studios with Rick Sandage and
Right.
and that
What
kind of-
years was this?
That was probably 80. Well, actually, in that interim there, we had Frank and Ronnie ended up went to the Marshall Tucker band, cause right after the band broke up,
Yeah.
basically that was part of the reason of what happened.
Yeah.
Tommy Caldwell died,
Passed away, yeah.
and their relationship with Frank, you know,
Yeah.
they asked him to come play, and we told him, man, you got to go.
You got to go do it.
You
Yeah.
got to do that.
Yeah.
You know, so he went and did that. But after they'd been there for a few months, 6 months maybe, I got a call from Frank and said, "Hey, Paul Riddle and myself and Ronnie, we're looking for something to do when we're home.
Right.
So would you be interested in just coming over and jam something over at Paul?" I said, "Sure, I'd love to." So we started going over there, and we kind of started developing some songs that we really liked. The name of the band was the Throbbers. That was something that Riddle had come up with,
Yeah.
PT had come up with. And so we just do it. It was all instrumental. No vocals, no nothing, you know.
Right.
And I had some pretty good stuff, you know,
Yeah.
and we started playing out stuff, you know, and
Right.
that kind of thing. And then we did that for about a year and a half or so. You know, we did a little studio thing, which was pretty good. And Paul sent it to some of his friends, and it looked like something was going to happen with it. And I think that's about the time that Marshall Tucker just kind of started to split up a little bit, you know.
Yeah.
And so that just kind of went over onto the back burner.
Right. So what was your transition? You know, I know you were live guitar and you'd done that for years. How did the transition work into the control room as the
Okay.
engineer? Like what
Well, that's
how
kind
did
of
that
like where
transform?
we are right now. Like I was doing that, you know, and
Yeah.
I was playing some, you know, and stuff like that. And I was doing sessions down there with Rick Sandage, and I asked Rick one day, I said, "Man, you know, I'm not traveling or doing anything anymore. Would you mind if I just came down here and hung out with you, you know, while you're doing sessions? I'd help set up or
Yeah, because
do
you
some
were
different stuff."
you were physically playing guitar on sessions
Right, yeah.
at
Well, it was at
Mark-
Sandcastle before. This was before they bought Mark
before the
V.
Mark V
That was in
deal, yeah.
when I started doing that was like, you know, about 82, 81, 82, and they didn't buy Mark V till about 88.
Yeah, because Mark V was still existing kind of on its own.
Right.
And then the Sandcastle studio
They
was a
were
separate
totally
deal at the
different
time. Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
So he said, "Yeah, okay." So I started going down there and hanging out. Maybe I might hang out after I did some guitar stuff for him, you know, and just trying to get the lay of the land because it was something I was really interested in.
Yeah.
Because we had done, after all that stuff in Muscle Shoals and Vermont, and we had been to Atlanta and did some stuff with down there with Bill Lowry, and so we did some stuff at Studio One with the guy that did the Leonard Skinner stuff. In fact, Leonard Skinner's drummer got us.
Artemis.
Artemis got us that spot
Yeah.
to go down there and cut some demos.
Right.
And then we had gone to Capricorn and done some stuff with Paul Hornsby
Yeah.
for Warner Brothers. And so, you know, I kind of had starting to kind of get a pretty good feel of what
Of
was
how all
going
that
on.
worked, yeah.
Yeah, you know, but I didn't have any experience actually doing it, you
Yeah.
know. So,
So Rick Sandage gave you your first shot
Yeah.
at the console.
yeah. And so after I'd been kind of helping him out for about a month, he called me one day and said, "Hey, are you busy on Saturday?" And I went, "No, what you got?" He said, "Well, I've got this lady coming in and my wife wants me to go somewhere with her." And I went, "Okay,
Yeah.
great, yeah, cool."
Yeah.
She just came in to sing with the track or something, from what I remember.
Yeah.
So I did that, and then I started he started calling me for a few other things. After I'd done that for a few months, Eddie Howard called Rick and said, "Hey, I'm looking for somebody to do like some weekend stuff or evening stuff or anything like that. You know anybody?" He said, "Yeah."
Because Eddie was at Mark V at the
Eddie
time.
was at Mark V.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
This was early 80s.
Right, yeah. 82,
Yep.
83.
Right.
And so So I went over and talked to Eddie and stuff. You know, it was a way different setup.
Yeah,
you know,
because that was the Neve console,
the Neve 8058. Yeah,
the Atari tape machine, I believe, was in there. And Eddie. Side note: we're going to do an episode with Eddie as well. So, but like, my dad was part of a Southern Gospel Quartet.
Yes,
and the Mark V thing was kind of the place for the quartet folks at the time.
That was the biggest quartet place
in the Southeast, probably.
Because the Nashville guys didn't want to have anything to do with them.
Right, at the time.
Yeah,
and so like as a little kid, Eddie, I was over there with Eddie, hanging out at these sessions. You know, just absorbing. What I didn't understand was like it was history in the making. You know, when I was 7, 8 years old, and I'm sitting in the room with Eddie Howard engineering on a Neve console, just soaking all that in. And what was the memories that I have from there, buddy, is like Eddie and Joe had figured out how to trigger drums, analog drums. So they're Joe's in there playing the kit in the main room, and then Eddie was triggering the MIDI samples, that they printed on tape, and that's like a core memory that I have of like, this is the coolest thing I have ever seen. It like 8 or 9 years old going in there, like how are these guys doing this? This is amazing. And now the sampling thing is that's what everybody does,
right? Yeah.
But at the time, triggering live drums and then offsetting the time to make it match up. Anyway, that's a whole other discussion I'm gonna have with Eddie. But Mark V was a premier Southeast studio because of the setup. The room had the parquet floors in it, the control room with the Neve and all the racks of gear
and all
the
the
mics
Neumann mics that they had.
All those Neumann mics were all over the whole studio.
Oh God,
it was a really, really incredible time for studio work in Greenville, South Carolina. And then Rick had Sandcastle set up as well. And what ended up being the catalyst for the merge there? Do you happen to know kind of how that went down?
I think the Huffmans were wanting to sell.
They're kind of wanting to sell out, and then Rick kind of
they'd already. When I first got there, they had 2 buildings.
Yeah.
When I first started there, the Neve console was in the other building from where the original building was.
Right.
They had gotten so busy, like in the 70s, that they had one room where they were mixing and one room where they were cutting stuff.
Right.
And then the stuff where they were, then this kind of business started to get a little smaller. Then they ended up just shutting down the original building.
Yeah, because everything moved to the White Horse Road building with Rick and those guys.
No,
eventually
before that.
But eventually, I guess
it ended up there. But while I was there, I'd been there 8 months or something like that. They decided to shut down that building over there and move all that stuff and rebuild the original building.
Right.
Yep. And then after that, when Rick came, he moved. He didn't really move much stuff in there. They got, I take that back, because in that time, between when they finally made the deal to do that, they had there was 2 offices in the back, and they hired me to come in and build those 2 rooms into a studio. And I think they used the machine from Sandcastle and the console from Sandcastle in there.
Gotcha. Well, that's an interesting deal, because they've sort of revamped that old Mark V building in downtown Greenville now.
I've been by there. It's pretty cool.
It's kind of a it's a music venue, and it's some history museum kind of stuff that's happening now. It's been pretty cool to see that get revived as part of the the growth of downtown Greenville's been insane just in general.
Yeah.
But being able to keep that little part of history has been pretty amazing.
But that era was when they turned that room around. The control room. It was just a little bitty box.
Yep.
And they flipped it around with a side view.
Gotcha. So let's talk about you were doing the Sandcastle Mark V stuff kind of as a freelance engineer type of guy, and at that point in time everything's all analog, all console on the front end, patch bay, rack gear, 2-inch tape. You got
razor
blades. You're doing actual cut edits, and
they used to do this thing where they brought in the Furman band and alumni, and they'd have like 40 or 50 pieces in that room.
Oh my goodness!
And they would cut these things for Benson Publishing
in Nashville.
Mm-hmm. And like the guy at Furman and a few other schools around, and they would write all these marching band charts.
Yeah.
And they'd bring these guys in to do it. And then they would go out on the field in fact, Sandage used to do that. He'd go out on the field at Furman, and they would have the marching band play this stuff, and he'd record it on an 8-track tape. And then they'd come back in the studio, and my job was to edit all that together.
Oh my goodness!
Just
with razor blades, and tape.
Razor blade, 2-inch tape.
Yeah.
They would cut a thing. The first time they were there, they just mixed them all and then edited the 1/4-inch.
Yeah, right.
And then they decided, well, we don't like that.
Oh no,
we want to mix it all at one time.
Oh my goodness!
So, okay, so they'd cut to whatever, and then they'd say, okay, we're going to pick it back up at measure 36, to whatever it was, and so my job was to edit while they were working on other stuff, was to edit all that together for them so they could mix it in one piece.
Yeah, unreal.
That was fun.
People have no idea if you've never taken a razor blade to a 2-inch
right, exactly,
tape
and you only got one shot.
Oh yeah.
There's no let's fix that.
Talk about pressure.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the progression over to Southeastern. Tell me a little bit of what went into that move for you and how that all came about. So, kind of being able to build a studio a little bit closer to your old stomping grounds, hometown.
Yeah. Well, what happened was this guy Maurice, and I can't remember Maurice's last name. I feel bad about that, but he was coming by. He was a friend of a mutual friend of mine. I can't remember who that was either right now, but he would come by and was asking me questions on how do you do. It was working for a guy building a studio.
Mm-hmm.
And it was in Easley, and it was at the Easley Christian Bookstore downstairs in the basement.
Right.
And this guy, Paul Waring, he owned that, and he had been doing he had a little section set up in his bookstore where he had copies of soundtracks on cassette. And people could come by and listen to them and pick which ones they felt like they could sing, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So he decided to build a little studio down in the basement where he could say, well, let's go downstairs and record that for you,
sure.
That kind of thing. So anyway, Maurice was coming over, Maurice Coker. He was coming over to Mark V and was asking me questions, how this is what we're doing. How do I build a patch bay? How do I get all this from here to there and all that kind of stuff? So I was just kind of going over with a lot of stuff, but it got to the point where, Maurice, I can't really tell you how to do that. I'm going to have to come over there.
Yeah.
So they hired me to come over to wire that room. They had I think they had an 8-track and a little console and stuff like that. So about probably a year later, or 8 months or a year later, is when the transition came from Sandcastle buying and going in with Eddie and buying Mark V.
Yeah.
And they didn't need another engineer because they had 2 engineers there and Eddie, and so And Eddie told me a few months before, he said, you probably need to start looking for something. So I was looking.
Right.
And so I just happened to go by one day to help them do some stuff. And I said, well, what are you going to do, when you get this built? Because Maurice had a job somewhere and Paul said, well, I'm not sure. Are you interested? And I said, yeah, I'd like to do I'll do some stuff for you. So I kind of started there. Kind of was like when he got a session, he would call me, and I'd go in and do some little stuff, And it got bigger, and the sessions got a little bit bigger, and we just kind of outgrew that space.
Mm-hmm.
And the place out on 153 where the sounding board had been sitting there empty for about 2, maybe 3 years.
Right. Now that was Otis Forrest.
Otis Forrest.
So Otis
place.
Forrest,
Otis,
just to give a little backstory, Otis Forrest, if you're familiar with Toto, Shannon Forrest plays drums for Toto.
Mm-hmm.
Otis was his dad.
And he played drums with everybody else in Nashville.
For sure, yeah. And Otis is one of the greatest. Otis will always be, to me, one of the greatest arranger minds that ever existed.
Mm-hmm.
But Otis kind of started the sounding board, which was an Easley 153, and then move out.
Him and with a couple of players from he wanted to be part of Mark V. And the same kind of thing with them, they didn't want to do that. He said, okay, well, I'll just build my own place.
Right.
And so he did that with a couple of the musicians that were playing out there.
Mm-hmm. And then you ended up moving southeast,
We ended up moving southeastern out there.
Into that.
And that was in 91.
Right. I was there. I know I was there. I remember being there. Remind everybody kind of what the setup was when you moved into Southeastern as far as gear goes. How did you have it set up at that time?
We had just bought a 16-track 1-inch machine,
mm-hmm.
and we had a Soundcraft console, I believe, and JBL monitors and the little Yamahas,
The NS10s.
And some outboard gear, the basic stuff that you had, at that time.
Right, yeah.
And that's where we started,
Right.
in that room.
And what do you recall? Do you recall a time when you were like, okay, DA88s are available, ADATs are available? Do you recall that transition period in the analog world when you felt like, okay, I need to make a switch to something digital or whatever format it was? Do you remember that? Do you recall that time?
Yes. And after we'd been there, I think 4 or 5 years or something like that, we decided we were at the point where we could expand.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had a friend that worked at West LA Music in LA. He was actually from Greenville. And so I called him. I said, here's what I want to do. He said, come out here. I'll show you what we got, and I'll get you a screaming deal. Okay. So I flew out there. And what I wanted to do, I wanted to look at the ADATs. The Tascam stuff hadn't come out yet.
Right.
It was just the ADATs.
Yeah, they were first on the scene with the digital tape.
So they put me in a room with a console and 3 of those machines.
Mm-hmm.
And I played with it for about an hour, and I came out and said, I wouldn't buy that. You couldn't give it to me.
Nope.
I wouldn't. There's no way. I wouldn't put my clients through that. I mean, every time you have to you rewind, and then you wait like 30 seconds, maybe,
for it to sync back up.
For them all to sync back up, and you probably already passed the point where you needed to be by the time they did it. And I just said, no. So I bought another 1-inch machine.
Yeah.
And something to sync them together.
Gotcha.
And that worked great.
Right.
Right up until I did that from 95, I think, for about 5 years.
Right.
And it was interesting. The way I got into Pro Tools was this guy that owned this little studio up in Campobello, where I actually ended up.
Mm-hmm.
Had built this thing for him to do some recording and stuff like that.
Now, was that so? Did Barney build that place? Barney Barnwell built the little place up there in Campobello where he has the festival and everything. They had kind of still have the festival going on.
Yep.
And so wait, I got to backtrack. Barney got you in.
He called me. He called me and said, "Hey, he had been there one time, been to my other place before,
Yeah.
and I love what they were doing. They were doing this rock and roll bluegrass stuff.
Okay.
You know, You Are My Sunshine and The Sunshine of Your Love. They would meld those together.
Yeah.
And it was just like I was going, man, I love this.
Yeah.
And he came to cut those tracks because he was on his way to Nashville to do a little video.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, Barney, listen. When you decide to do this record, call me. What I don't care how much money you got.
Right.
I want to do this record, you know.
Yeah.
So probably about a year later, he called me and said, well, I'm ready to do that record.
Right.
And I said, okay, well, when are we going to start? He said, well, there's just one little key thing we have to talk about first. I said, okay, what's that? He said, I built my own room. I went, okay.
Okay.
He said, and I want you to come up here and do it. Okay, it's a gig. You know what I mean? You know, I said, what do you got? And he was telling me a little Soundcraft console and ADATs. And I went, okay. You know, they had improved some. This was like 4 or 5 years later.
Yeah, yeah.
No, he actually had the Tascam.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he had.
Yeah. Which those weren't quite as bad, but still super annoying.
Still the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I go up there and I cut this record, and we were just about through with the record. And he came into the studio one day. He said, "Man, I got a surprise for you." I said, "What?" He said, "I just bought a Pro Tools rig." And I went, "Really?"
Wow.
I don't know a first thing about a Pro Tools rig, you know?
Yeah.
I've never even seen one except in a magazine. He said, well, he bought it in Charlotte, whatever the big music store was up there at that time. This was in 99, I think, or right in there. I said, yeah? And he said, this guy is going to come down here, and he's going to tell you how to do whatever you need. He's going to show you what to do.
Now wait a minute. I want to interject something here.
Yeah.
Barney is a little bit of a notorious character up in the northern part of Spartanburg County. Notorious for running moonshine. So in my mind, I'm thinking Barney sold. There's no telling how many gallons of moonshine he sold in order to buy a Pro Tools rig in Charlotte. So,
now,
all right.
tell you, Barney could make money. The man knew how to make money.
Yeah. Go ahead, finish.
So anyway, so this guy. So I said, okay. So I started writing down how do I make an aux? How do I do? How do I assign this to this? How do I set up a reverb? How do all that stuff? I mean, I had a notepad this big, transferring from analog to digital.
Sure.
How do I need to be able to do all this stuff if I'm going to do this? So this guy shows up, and so we get it all open and we start talking about it. And I said, okay, well, now how do I do this? He said, I'm not sure. And I went, okay, how do I do this? Well, I really don't.
This is the Pro Tools guy.
This was the Pro Tools guy that sold. Yeah. So he finally, about the third or the fourth thing on the list, he said, "Oh, I can do that." I said, "Okay, if you can do that, then I can figure out how to do a couple of these other things related." And then we went down this list, and about half of it he didn't have a clue, didn't know at all how to set that up. So I said, "Okay, with what the information you've given me, I think I can figure the rest of it out."
Right.
Because if you're going to do an aux, you can figure it out how to send it which one of these was for what, and get it to headphones, and all that kind of stuff. So
well, there's so many DAW softwares available now. There's such a debate about which one do you like better and which one do you prefer and all the things. And Pro Tools was really kind of it set the standard, and it has to me, Pro Tools was set up for analog console minded individuals because the routing made sense for an engineer that had always worked on a console with tape and a patch bay and all the things. So they tried to simulate that.
Just move you. It didn't want to blow your top of your head off. They just wanted to gradually just move you into doing exactly the same thing. You could look at that console and see what you needed.
Yeah. And it was a little bit intuitive, and when I was at school at Belmont in the audio engineering program, okay, same time frame you're talking about right here, and we were being taught how to engineer with 2-inch tape. They actually had a 1/2-inch digital tape machine, a Sony machine, with a matching console at the time there at Belmont. But like we were having to learn, mix automation on the console and recall our automated mixes. We did have to cut tape, and I knew Pro Tools was happening when I was going through the audio engineering program, but it wasn't part of our training, So when I left the audio engineering program at Belmont, it was a year, 2 years later that Pro Tools, like, it just became the international standard for whatever reason. That's what it's the software that became the standard, the original. And so I found myself, 2 or 3 years after graduating from an audio engineering program, sort of being thrust into this digital world of software that I had to rethink a few things, except most everything I had learned hands-on analog in the analog world. It did apply, but you also had to think about things in a different way, because there was a period of time between like 98, 99, and then 2005 where, you had those digital hard drive machines that came into play that, Mackie had one, Alesis had one, that would allow you to bring up their software screen, and you could cut and edit within their proprietary software, but it was all hard drive based.
Right.
You hand an artist a hard drive as their tape.
Right.
Their tape reel. And I still catch myself saying tape. We're going to print.
Oh,
this
I
to
do
tape
too. All the time. Records, tape.
All the things. But I've told younger engineers that have come through and interned and whatnot that I feel like my generation of engineers kind of grew up in the best of all worlds availability of, like, I had to learn everything that I know about audio and recording and consoles and tape and all the things. I had to learn that hands-on before I could not function in the audio recording world or even in the live mix world. When you put your hands on a console to mix, a live performance. So I had to already know what an aux was, what a bus was, what a send was, what a master fader was. All the things I had to already know what, how, and when to use what. VCAs, all the things were there in kind of the audio engineering training I got. But then you have this just world turned upside down in the audio world where the standard is software. Like, there's still outboard gear available now, but like, what did you feel? You were one of the first people that I knew of in our area that was like just embraced the Pro Tools thing and was like, this is where I'm going. Did you feel like you were like a fish out of water? Was it like a pioneer? What is that?
A little bit, but I never really thought about the pioneer part. But what I saw was once I played with that enough to figure out how to set up a session, and I got the material into Pro Tools, and I did that first record, I went like, wow, I figured out that I could make a better record in the same amount of time that I was trying to do with analog.
Yeah, did you feel like it was more efficient? Yes, time wise and all that?
Everything. I mean, I finally, I figured out how to copy and paste something, and I don't know. You don't need to go back out and cut that. I've already got that over here. I'll just copy it. Bam, 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 bam.
Right.
You know what I mean?
No punches.
You just that flow, And I found out if it was taking me 2 hours to mix a song and repair it, on one of those sessions like we did at that time, I could do it in an hour.
Right. Because the recall was immediate.
And if I had 2 hours, I could do twice as good a job as I could do in that hour.
Yeah.
So I found out that I could do a better product for my client just by using that technology.
Yeah.
And that's when I went like, yeah,
You're in.
that's when I went head first into it.
Yeah. Well, I've always, I've never really told you this before, but I've always just thought the world of your career and everything that you had done, and especially embracing that new technology as a, you kind of come from the old school world of the,
right,
of the 70s and early 80s, where just there was no other,
right, yeah,
there was no other platform,
right,
but you being able to jump in the studio environment and say, this is where it's headed.
Right.
This is, I feel like you kind of saw the vision of like, this is where audio recording is headed.
Yeah, you couldn't fight it. I mean, it was getting to that point where you didn't really have much of a choice, and clients were asking for, did you do your ADAT? No.
Yeah.
Do you do task cam? No, I wouldn't burden you with that. And that's basically what it was. It was they broke down so much, they were inconsistent, dropouts and all that. And I figured that out in an hour and a half in a little room in LA, that this was not where I want to go.
Yeah. Well, that era of audio recording and advancement in technology, that 99 to 2005
there's always
window.
that little space between you're here, you want to go here, but you got to get through this.
Yeah,
this little space right
and
here.
it was still Pro Tools has gotten better in the past 5 or 6 years without having any buggy releases and updates and all the things. And there was always growing pains in that era of time where is my computer fast enough to keep up with what the software wants to do, and then you're fighting all that
and the
stuff.
update thing was, I mean, I think a few years ago I did an update. It took me 2 weeks.
Yeah,
because every piece of software that I was using had to be working with this particular OS, and it didn't.
Yeah,
and so it was a nightmare. And then at the time you had to email somebody or call somebody or, all that. Oh, yeah, well, we're going to have that next Thursday. Well, you said you had it 3 weeks ago. What's going on?
At the time when you're working with the software-based stuff, and you could get a customer service agent on the phone at the time. Mm-hmm. But if something needed to be done and you're in the middle of a session, you were out of luck.
Yeah, exactly.
If you had a hang up that couldn't be fixed at the time,
right? Yeah,
then there was no
shut it down.
Yeah, there was no like uninstalling and reinstalling and rebooting.
And with analog, you just jump to another track.
That channel's not working. Let's move to another.
This will move over. Repatch around it.
It definitely was that was an interesting time of technological advance, and the equipment and the gear became more available to the home studio setup and the home studio artist. All of that technological advancement happened in that era of time when you could go to Guitar Center and buy, a Focusrite interface and a Dell laptop,
right?
And record a few tracks at home.
Sure, yeah.
So it was an interesting time, and we've come so far. I feel super privileged to have sort of witnessed all of what I feel like is all of those different eras of the recording industry and how things are done. And bottom line is a recording engineer's job is not necessarily really changed in the history of music recording.
Right.
It's just there's different tools to get to the end result that you're looking for, and I try to personally, I've always tried to be open-minded and embrace and test out new softwares that come out, even though if it's something that I'm not really, I don't really love a certain software that comes out. I always want to go try it and see what's being offered.
And I always go, no, thank you.
Yeah,
maybe I'm a snob or whatever, but a couple of people have tried to get me to come to their studio and do something on this particular software. I said, I don't work on that software.
Yeah.
Well, you could learn. I said, look, I've got 25 years into this right here.
Yeah.
Why I don't have enough time left in my life to learn another software, you know, to do that. So you might want to call somebody else. You know?
Yeah, it's
I can come help. I mean, I can still hear. I can listen, and say, hey, you need to change this or do this if it's some kind of mix. I helped them build a studio down in Southern Westland down there, and they had what's the Apple software?
Logic.
Logic, yes.
Yeah.
And so that's what they had, and they had to keep that. And I said, okay, I'll build the room for you, but I don't know anything about Logic. I'll learn Logic enough to interface it with this gear and to show you and set up some stuff and show you how to do it. But no, I won't be coming down here and doing stuff, because this why?
Yeah, I understand that, and it's kind of once you get your workflow, it's kind of a workflow thing.
It
for
is.
some
It really is. Because you learn the keystrokes and all that stuff, and you're looking at the screen and you're doing the keystrokes. You're not, and then suddenly all the keystrokes are in the wrong place. Everything's in the wrong place. Everything on the screen you're looking at's in the wrong place. So I just went like, I'll help you. I'll build the room for you. I'll do all that. I'll just help you design it, and I'll help you put the right gear you need into it, for what you can afford to do. And then I'll let you have it. And he'll call me every once in a while and say, well, I said, well, you need to do, thinking analogically, you need to do this is what you don't have it patched right or something like that.
Well, a signal chain is a signal chain is a signal chain.
That's right.
It's wires and connections, right? As a
studio or live, it doesn't matter.
Super general comment, but that's kind of what it. That's kind of what it is.
But
right?
it is,
Yeah. Well, buddy, I counted privileged to have you here, man. Every time you come in,
privileged for you allowing me to come.
Well, every time you come in and work on a session, man, I like to be a fly on the wall, because you've been able to work on so many awesome projects over the years, and we do consider it an honor for you to be in our area as one of the
thank you.
one of the all-time top engineers here in the upstate of South Carolina for sure, and much less the southeast region, and I sincerely appreciate you coming in and giving us your time today to kind of talk through and give everybody a view of your career and kind of the audio world that you experienced throughout the years. I think it's important that we keep those things alive. And
I do too.
And people.
I agree with you there.
For people to know, kind of where how music has developed, how audio recording has developed over the years. I think is incredibly important to keep those things alive. And man, you're welcome down anytime. And anything you got going, just give me a call, man. I'd love to be a part of it.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
But thank you guys again for tuning in to the Studio 101 Recording Podcast. My name is Brad Phillips, and we will catch you guys again on another episode of the Studio 101 Podcast.